Hello, and thank you for joining me on my program tonight. I'm always grateful for everyone that comes in and joins me. Tonight I've got a message that I've entitled God's Love. I want to bring it in a three-part manner. The first part, we're going to talk about God, Abraham and his son, and Isaac, his son. God, part two, God and his son, Jesus, and part three, a father and his prodigal son. Let's begin by going into Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. There's a lot of reading, but it tells the story so much better than I can do. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham? And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. Verse 6, So Abraham took the wood and the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. Then he said, Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? So the 2 of them went together. Okay, let's pick up right here. God had given Isaac to Abraham as a lineage that the promise would pass through Isaac. Let's look at the conversation that Abraham has with his 2 servants before he leaves. He says, Stay here with the donkey, the lad and I are going up yonder to worship, and we will return to you. We will come back to you. We will come back to you. Do you get that? It's not an I will return. It's we. He's speaking faith already. What does he have faith in? He had already heard from God. He had already abundantly heard from God, and he was counting on this. You see, Abraham had another son. His name was Ishmael. But God had made it abundantly clear that that was not the son that the lineage was to travel through. That had been through Sarah's handmaiden Hagar. That was not the son for the lineage. Instead, it was to come through Sarah, his wife Sarah, and their son Isaac. The lineage was to go through there. Now, God had made it more than abundantly clear to Abraham about this. So now God has told him to go to the mountaintop and to offer his son Isaac as a burnt offering to him. Abraham, let's just look at something else that he didn't say. He didn't tell the servants, well, I'm going up to the hill, up to the mountain up there, and I'm going to go kill the promise that God had given me. I'm just going to go kill the promise. I don't know why God wants me to kill the promise, but I'm going to go kill the promise. He didn't say that. And he also didn't say, I don't want to go, but I'm going anyway. God told me to do this. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to go do it. Oh, I've said it that way many a time. I'm going to go do this. I don't want to do it, but God told me to, so I'm going to go do it. He never spoke that to his servants, not once. Instead, he said, the lad and I are going to go up to the mountaintop and we're going to go worship God. Worship. Worship. Is this the time to do that when God has just asked you to do something that you bitterly, bitterly do not want to do? Worship? I would suggest to you, when God asks you to do something, the first thing we all need to do is make it our destination is one of worship. His destination on that mountaintop was one of worship. No matter what, worship. Have you ever had a time in your life, maybe you feel called into the ministry? Oh, you're studying and you're going to be the big time minister. God's going to give you a great big church. And suddenly it seems in your prayer life that He's called you to go work at the halfway house or to go work at the shelter. Why God, I'm busy studying and I'm going to be the pastor that you want me to be, and I'm going to be the minister or the evangelist that you want me to be. And I really don't have time to go work there, God, because I'm going to prepare my life to be this person that you're calling me to be. I am going to prepare to be the person that you are calling me to be. Who's doing the calling right now when that happens? Think about how it even sounds to God. God said, go to the halfway house. God said, go to the shelter. God told you someplace to go. But we say, but God. How often have we thought of it as a detour in our life, as something that is beneath what God is calling us toward, that if we went in that direction, our dreams would be shattered. There'd be no hope for them to ever expand again, to grow. We would look like we would be stuck over here instead of going over here. Do I speak out of personal experience? You bet. I'm just like everybody else. We're all in this. So was Abraham. God had called him to go up to sacrifice Isaac. Now, Isaac had heard clearly from God before, and that knew that this was to be the lineage. I believe with all my heart that Abraham thought to himself, I'm going to obey God, and I'm going to worship Him, because you know why? Because God gave me a promise way back here. God gave me a vision. He gave me a promise. And I believe with all my heart that God is still going to come through. So I'm going to go to the top of the mountain, and I'm going to take my young son, Isaac, the lineage, the promise. And I'm going to place him on that altar. And God will do what He wants to do. But I know one thing, if I have to take that knife and what appears to be kill my promise, my God knows how to restore and will restore to me my son, my promise. Or my God will come up with another plan and show it to me. I know that promise was from God. And this I also know I heard from God, so I will obey. But I'll make it a place of worship. A place of worship, not a place of rebellion. You know, Abraham's son, Isaac, looks up to his father and he says, Isaac spoke to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, now this was spoken in Genesis chapter 22 and revealed in the New Testament. Spoken in Genesis 22. Verse 8. My son, God will provide for Himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. Where's the lamb for the service? I don't know, God. I don't know, but I know you got it. And so, God, you're going to provide it. He told his son the truth. Either way, no matter what happened, God would provide. And that promise would be kept alive. You see, there was something that Abraham knew about God. He was not one to break his promise. He never did. He never took a promise back. Once a promise was spoken, it was in concrete. It's just not going to go away. God does not change. And he can't. It's not in his nature. So when he speaks a promise is a promise. It will be kept. And he knew that about God. And he does not ask of others what he himself would not do. God is not that kind of a father. Here, you don't do as I do, but just do as I say. Oh, so often we say, don't do as I do, but do as I say. I know what we're supposed to do here. Forgive me for not doing it, but I know what we're supposed to do. God doesn't treat us that way. God does not ask of us what he would not do. Continuing on in Genesis, chapter 22, verse 9. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac, God's promise, his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, to slay the promise. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Once we receive a promise that we feel like it's going to be big. Oh, we love it. Sometimes we actually withhold it from God. We began to try to grow it. We began to try to nurture it instead of allowing God to unfold it in his time and in his plan. We take the promise and try to run with it, but it doesn't work that way. And God often will put us in places of test to see if we're ready. I'm a retired school principal and teacher, and I never gave children a test just to see how mean I could be. It was never about that. I wanted to see, did they understand the material that I had given? Were they ready for the next level? I believe every test God ever gives us, it is not to see how mean he can be to us. It's to see if we're ready to go to that next level, that next walk. Oh, you don't just simply say, I'm going to have a big conference, folks, and you don't even have a message yet. You don't have a place. You don't have a people. You don't have a following. You have nothing. Now, unless God told you to do that, and if he did, then you do what God tells you. But there's a growing period, a becoming period. I believe Abraham was in a becoming time of his life, because that promise was so big, so massive, that it would carry from Genesis and throughout the New Testament. There was a growing time for even Abraham and Isaac. God tells Abraham that he had just passed the test. Abraham loved God and would obey him at all cost. The test was about trust and obedience. You know, the only way we get to the next ministry is to do what he told us to do right now. You don't just jump past today. You go through today. If God said go do this, even though it seems menial, or it's something that you don't choose of your own accord, God will not put you in tomorrow's position until you can get through today's, obeying and trusting him. That sounds too simple. But that's the way God works. Go through today with him, and tomorrow is waiting. Faith unto faith, glory unto glory, he says. In verse 13, then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket with by its horns. And so Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. As it is to this day. Did you get that? As it is to this day, the Lord will provide. Abraham spoke something, named a location, but he named more than a location. He named a an understanding that needed to travel throughout the course of the Bible and throughout history. The Lord will provide for himself. The Lord will provide. Now then, moving on, let's go from the Old Testament and let's look at 2 verses in the New Testament, because Abraham said it right. The Lord will provide. John 3:16 through 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Abraham, he never required it of him. He tested it of him, but not required it. God, Abraham spoke it, will provide his own lamb, his own sacrifice. For God so loved the world that it gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Verse 17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Like the ram caught in the thicket behind Abraham that day, God provided a ram for the offering for Abraham. God provided his Son for the offering for you and for me. He took his own Son. God provided. That means that I cannot provide, never could. Only God, and God does. For God so loved, let's look at the words for a second. When you see the word for in the Bible, I always want to take that word for and use the word because or therefore, but usually it's because. When I see the word for, I'm about to find a reason that will follow. For God so loved the world, because God so loved the world. And then they stuck in the word so. You know, we could have said, for God loved the world. No, the word is so, which means depth and breadth. It is a widening and a depth that he wanted to get across to us. God's love was so big. Because God's love was so big, he loved the world. He loved you and he loved me. And so he provided his only Son. God provided. Because, why? Because he loves us. And then if we go on down to verse 17, there's that word for again. For God did not send his Son into the world. Here's your reason. Because he loved us. Why? Because he didn't send his Son into the world to condemn us, but to save us, to love us unto himself. Oh, verse 17 is so important. I even had a shirt made one time, a t-shirt. It said, John 3:17, and I was just hoping people would say, what? Did they make a typo on your shirt? And I wanted to say, no, let me tell you what it is, because nobody ever knows it. John 3:17, open your Bible tonight, memorize it. It's so important. Share it with everybody you know. John 3:17, say it with me, John 3:17. Because God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. My son, God, Abraham says to Isaac, will provide a lamb for himself. Let's go on. Let's look at the prodigal son for a second. There was a master, a father, who owned a vast amount of land and properties. He had 2 sons. One goes up to him and he says, Father, give me all of my inheritance now. I'm young and I want to use it now while I'm young enough to use it. Give me all of my inheritance now, and I want to go away to a far land. I don't want to stay here and work like this. Let me have my inheritance. I'm big and I can do with it as I choose. Well, the father did just that. The father gave him what was rightfully to be his. And the young man went off to a faraway land, and he had parties and spent the money. In today's world, we would call it had the fast life. He had money, he had women, he had parties, he had food, fine and fancy things. In today's time, he would have cars. He would have everything of his choosing because the father had been wealthy and had given him a large sum. Suddenly, he looks at his bank account. It's gone. It's gone. Now he becomes hungry. Suddenly, the friends are no longer there. Maybe the cars of today's time are repossessed. They're pulled back because they weren't paid for. The house is gone. Everything he had, gone. And he's hungry. He goes to another area and he attaches himself as a servant to another landowner who raised pigs, swine. And he is now the caregiver for the swine. And he goes out, but this master is a cruel master, and he barely feeds him anything. And so the young man is always hungry. And one day he looks and he's just fed the pigs. And he's out there with the pigs, and he's thinking, you guys, I don't even have food this good. Those dried corn husk, I don't even have that much. Those pods of corn that are dried. Oh, if I could just even eat that, I'm hungry. And then he thought to himself, what am I doing? I'm out here wanting the pig's food. My own father, who I walked away from, he treated servants better than I'm being treated here. I'll go back to my father and ask to be his servant. Surely my father, if I go back and beg, surely there's room for me. He'll let me be a servant in his house. The young man begins to travel back home. Now the thing about the father was the father, although he permitted him to leave, always desired for his return. How do I know that? Because the word says that the father was out watching and waiting for his return. God will not hold you, folks. You are never a prisoner. We're not robots. We're never a prisoner in the walk of faith. But oh, the blessings that come by being in the walk of faith. The prodigal son realized it. He realized that he had gone away from the father's protection. He had gone away from the father's love in his area. He couldn't experience it. He needed to come home. And once the father saw him coming toward him, you see, that's all we need to do with the father, is just step toward him. The father ran to him and put his arms around him, and he said, kill the fatted calf, go and get a new robe, clothes, put the signet ring on the son. And the son said, oh, Father, I will be your servant. I'll just bow here and I'll be your servant. And he picked him up and he said, no, son, you're my son. We will celebrate tonight. My son who was dead is now alive. My son is here with me. You see, Jesus was God's perfect sacrifice. Only God does the ultimate. Only God's love will come in and feed your spirit and nourish you and save you. God's Son, Abraham, was tested, but never asked to do what God himself would not do. And Abraham knew him so well that he said, God will provide. That's trust. If God has asked you something tonight to do that is outside of what you see as this big vision, walk out what He's told you to do today. The vision, the promise will not be damaged in any way. But the vision is only good if He can use you. Do you understand that? It's only good if He can use me. If I have this big grandiose vision, but I refuse to do the thing that He asked me today because, why, Lord, you know I'm preparing for this. If I can't hear and obey His voice today, I won't be hearing and obeying His voice there in that day. God takes us through these little paths of journeys as we learn to listen to Him, to obey Him. That prodigal son had a lot to learn, but he did learn it. And he went back with a spirit that's so sweet, so beautiful. Oh, Father, here I am. I'll be your servant. I'll do whatever. I'll go feed your pigs. I'll go feed your sheep. I'll go feed whatever you want me to do. I'll do whatever you want me to do, Father. That's a son to his father, and the father knew it. You see, God looks for children that will lay down their life before the Father and say, Father, I don't care what it is, I'll do it. If you've been the prodigal son, run back quickly. Come in with a repentant spirit, and He'll give you back the robe of life. He'll put on the signet of authority, and your name will be called son, not servant. He loves you tonight. Trust Him with all that you've got. Please let me pray with you very quickly. Father, in the name of Jesus, we bring back every prodigal son first to you, Father. Everyone that you're speaking to tonight, across the airwaves, across the internet. Father, I pray in the name of Jesus that everyone will submit. Father, here I am. It's a mess, and I have nothing to bring back. But I just bring me. And that's all He seeks. And if there's someone that, Father, that you've called with big dreams, but suddenly you said, go here, I pray that they'll obey. Invite someone to next week's program, and thank you for joining me. God bless you.
We hope you've enjoyed Kingdom Ministries with Reverend Dee Levens. For more from Dee, read The Long, Long Night, The Story of Destiny, and Echoes from God, a Christian study book for growing deep and strong in the faith. Connect with Dee and purchase her books at deelevens.com. Send an email to deelevenstv@gmail.com or text Dee at 254-681-6099.